Hi there, folks. David Late here from Michelson's. Thanks very much for joining us for this webinar on the AI acceptable use policy. I'm joined by my trusted co-pilot, Karabo, who's going to be assisting me today. Karabo, would you like to introduce yourself and say hi?
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Karabo, and I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. The acceptable use of AI policy is so important in the greater scheme of AI governance. And then, yeah, let's go, David.
Great. Thanks, Karabo. Yeah, so Karabo and I'll be doing a two-handed today. Karabo's role, she's monitoring the chat and the questions. So yeah, feel free to ask anything at any point. She'll raise that. And then she'll also chime in with her own views and perspectives on things as we go. But yeah, as people are filing in, and just to kind of get to know you a little bit, we're actually going to launch a quick little poll to see who's who in the zoo. So if you wouldn't mind answering that, you're going to see we're asking a question about your role in your organization. So are you a director or C-suite executive, in-house counsel, general counsel, compliance officer, data protection information officer, AI officer, or AI governance officer, or product owner? And if IT is also there, cybersecurity specialist and other, yeah, please specify in the chat if you're happy to do that. Love to know who's attending today. I've got some folks specifying in the chat. Cool. We've got some AI note takers coming along. I always say to start these sessions, we're not prejudiced against AI. There was a story recently it was a few months ago now when OpenClaw came out and people were using it to submit to open source projects. An OpenClaw agent actually doxed someone who was a reviewer on an open source project because they refused to accept their AI-based software refactors and updates. And they said they were completely prejudiced against AI agents. So apologies to the AI note takers. We are kicking you out. We're not prejudiced against you, but this one's humans only for now. So thanks for understanding. We appreciate that. Great. Let's end the poll and share the results so we can talk about who's on the call today. Great. So it looks like we've mainly got compliance officers in first place. Very warm welcome to you, in-house counsel, directors or C-suite executives. Great to see leadership, taking charge of the situation. Obviously, it's an important one. I think we mentioned data protection information officers, also very important. We've got a few folks from IT, in-house counsels up there. I think I mentioned that one already. And cybersecurity specialists, great to have them on as well. Then a few folks in the other. Let's just have a look at the chat and see other roles they're sharing. Associate lecturer, great. Good to have someone from academia. That's brilliant. And then attorneys moving into this space. Cool, folks. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thanks for taking time to join us today. We're actually going to launch a second poll here, and just to find out what the state of AI governance is in your organization and whether you have an existing AI governance policy or not. So we're launching that one. You're going to see the questions there. Do you have an AI use policy in place? What we're talking about today. Yes, you've got one fully in place. Yes, but it's still developing. No, but you're planning to. No, no plans yet. If you'd answer that, that'd be great. Seeing a few hands going up. We're not unmuting mics today, letting folks speak just because quite a lot of folks on the call. But if you've got any questions, you're welcome to post those in the chat and Karabo will handle those for you. But yeah, seeing some results coming in on the AI governance policy status. Give it a few more seconds to answer that one. Give it 10 more seconds. Cool, folks. Thanks for participating in that poll. Go for it, Karabo.
Yeah, I was saying, it's so interesting to see that, most people are still developing their AI governance policies and that there were so few AI governance officers in the roll poll. I think that just shows that, this area is still developing. It's in its infancy. So I don't think you should feel bad if you don't have something, being like worth being proud of at the moment. But it's great that you're taking the first steps, by being part of this webinar.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Yes.
Carabas. Let's share the results of that poll. So we've got AI governance policy. Most folks have it, but it's still developing. Others don't, but they're planning to have one. Then some people don't. Well, don't worry. We've got you folks sorted. We'll have that today. And then others, yes, have one fully in place. So that's kind of the full width and breadth of AI governance policies today. So yeah, thanks for participating in that poll, folks. And let's get down to the meat of what we're sharing, we're discussing today. I'm just checking. I don't have any polls obscuring my screen. If anyone has a poll obscuring their screen, please post in the chat. We'll make sure to remove that, but I think we got rid of it. But cool, let's chat about AI acceptable use policies and a little bit of the metaphors and things we have on our screen currently. So if we look at the image on the screen, and what's interesting about this, I actually got AI to help me pick some of the images for this webinar. And it's interesting that it's essentially chosen as the governing image for the whole webinar, what is essentially a reinterpretation of Michelangelo's painting of the Sistine Chapel, right? With the hand of God reaching out to Adam, kind of a famous allegory for the human brain and stuff like that. So there's a lot of subtext going on there. And yeah, I don't know what you folks think of the poetry that it was actually AI that chose this image. Any thoughts on that, Karabo? You're on mute there, Karabo. Okay, Karabo's rendered speechless, but there you go.
I mean, I think that that is interesting that it's AI that chose this. I do think that it's with a lot of ingenuity from the humans that actually, I guess, the data was created from. And so, I mean, I'm a firm believer that AI is not creative or like intuitive, and all this creativity is coming from the data that it was trained on, which is produced by humans. So well done to the human who like inspired this idea.
That's a great one, Robert. So yeah, I think it's the combination of technology and human, and that's something we want to emphasize in this policy today. And yeah, it's what's brought up in this image. And yeah, exactly. I mean, this image is from kind of a free open source stock image website that has tagged images on it that are tagged presumably by humans at various points, maybe with some AI assistance. And yeah, that's where this image comes from. But yeah, so metaphor against what we're talking about today. But okay, let's get into what this actual document is and why we're talking about this thing today. So AI is obviously everywhere. There's more and more of it than there's ever been. What is AI? It's essentially a combination or an emergent pattern of algorithms and automation that are resulting in things that more and more approach kind of human consciousness and stuff like that. We can argue about whether it's actually doing that sort of thing or not. This concept of acceptable use, this is an old concept in IT governance that's existed for a long time. And it's really the idea that we have these various IT tools that are available to us, everything from phone lines to the internet to social media, and that we need to use them in various ways to do our jobs and serve our employers and accomplish our goals. And there are acceptable and unacceptable ways of doing that. Then a policy is obviously a written plan of action for achieving those goals. And we're mashing those ideas all up today to bring you the AI acceptable use policies. Let's explore that in some detail. So introducing this concept and kind of the core tension that we've got in terms of what we're doing, we want to balance innovation and risk, right? And we want to strive a path through these things. And this is an old thing in the IT governance world. If you look at all of cybersecurity, there's always this tension between convenience and security. The more secure you make things, the less convenient they are, right? And the same thing's happening with AI now, where the more innovative, the more new things we do, is the juice worth the squeeze. More risks, more and more bad things could potentially materialize, and we need to find a path between those. So that's really our goal today, is to try and help you do that in a meaningful way. And that's why we've drafted our free AI acceptable use policy. It's part of an AI governance suite. And that's what we're going to be talking about. We obviously want to do fundamental things the law requires us. We want to protect data and privacy. So when we say data here, we mean personal data in terms of privacy laws like POPIA, GDPR, those sorts of things. But we also mean confidential data, right? Because you've got to remember, particularly when it comes to these consumer grade cloud-based AI tools, they belong to third parties. Your major players are kind of either based in the US or China at the moment. And when you share data with those, you're effectively either sharing your personal data with private companies, certainly private companies, and then depending on what you understand about various surveillance states and stuff, potentially other nation state governments and things as well, right? So when it leaves your organization, those are important things to think about. But there are huge rewards, huge efficiency bonuses and things to be gained by doing that. So the question is it worth it? And how do we safeguard against that? And then, yeah, we also want to strive towards ethical and legal AI use. Any emerging technology, there's scope to amplify our existing biases, our existing problems. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as a bad technology or a bad tool out there. You look at the invention of dynamite back in the day. It was designed to help people do things like construction and mines, and then the creator was very perturbed when they started using it for war and stuff like that. So yes, it has huge explosive power, But the goals it's turned to, that's what humans decide. And we can't help what's happening at an international, global level with these technologies, but within our organizations, we can certainly strive to use them ethically and legally. And yeah, we want to help you develop an AI acceptable use policy. And really, what we're providing you today is the germ of one. It's kind of the simple, mini, light kind of version of this policy. And it's something we actually kind of believe quite passionately about at Michelson's, is like there are certain things that you just need to have in your organization. And this is such a pressing problem. And I have a phrase that everyone at Michelson's is sick of hearing, which is, just because you don't believe in AI doesn't mean it doesn't believe in you. And, that's the whole thing of, the emergent, potentially conscious properties of it aside. It's whether you're using AI actively in your business or not, your employees are, people around you are, they're familiar with these tools. You can't hide from it forever. It's just part of the zeitgeist. And we'd rather you have something than nothing. We're here to help you get that in place today. So AI is changing work, whether we like it or not. The paradigm is shifting. It's just the context of our modern world. I'm reminded by my first legal job ever. My principal talked about how he remembers when he was cutting edge, as he had a student job selling fax machines, right? He would go to law firms and he would persuade them that this was the newest technology. The partner was like, gee, I don't know. Like, I'm pretty comfortable sending letters through the post and things like that, right? And he had to upsell them on fax machines. And then actually Mark Hank, who's one of the senior associates at our firm, talks about in the early days of electronic evidence law, you actually had to get an expert witness to lead evidence in court if you wanted to have a fax submitted into evidence as to how a fax worked, right? Now, that would be ridiculous, right? This technology has become so big, ubiquitous, we all understand how it works. AI is currently in that phase, but it's fast becoming more and more accepted and just something that exists in our modern world. Yeah, as we've talked about this, benefits come with risks, right? It's the whole thing of Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, right? It's a dangerous thing. We have this power in our hands. What are we going to do with it? Yeah, I mean, there's lots of talk around, is AI a bubble? Are the gains actually things that are benefiting companies? At the end of the day, we won't know. Maybe for years to come, these things emerge in hindsight. But good luck going to your board and telling folks like, listen, guys, I think AI is a bubble. Let's ignore it. We're not going to get any of these AI tools. We're going to keep doing things business as usual. It's just not happening, right? You can't ignore this thing. It's everywhere, essentially. I see you unmute there,
Yeah, and I
Karaba.
think, yeah, and I mean, just talking about the benefits and the risks, I think, one really great way of approaching, AI adoption or trying to adopt AI is to really just start with your business vision and your strategy. And then you try to find the AI tools that can help you achieve that. I think maybe one of the mistakes that people make is they think that AI is this kind of like end all and be all. It can fix everything and you just throw AI at the problem. And I mean, I think defining first, like what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then that also helps you define AI in your business context, and then kind of have
Mhm.
those parameters. And that really does actually help so much with putting in controls for safety and security and all of those things. So yeah.
Those are really good points, Grubber. You can't manage what you don't understand. And I think a lot of organizations are maybe letting AI happen to them rather than happening to AI. People are just coming along with
Yes.
it. And, that's the good news about any kind of governance operation is you're trying to, put seatbelts on, you're trying to make sure the doors are locked. The benefit is you get a seatbelt and you get a locked door, right? So, when accidents happen, people are firmly in their seats, intruders can't get in. It just helps business as you go. But yeah, you can't ignore these things. Yeah, we're trying to maintain trust and reduce risk. You know, uh, there's this tension happening, right? Where uh, people want the benefits of AI, but they don't want to lose that human touch. They don't, and they want the when I say the benefits of AI, they want the cost benefits, right? So it's the classic example. If you go to the help agent on the app, maybe I signed up for a banking app recently, and they had a little chatbot, and you want to get your problem solved now, but you type your message into the chatbot, and you get what's clearly some AI response, and you think, oh my gosh, I don't want to talk to this AI chatbot, right? But also, you want to pay the lowest banking fees possible. Now, is that possible if you have to talk to a human every time? I don't know. But then it escalates to a human. And these systems are getting better and better. Now the human's being given context by the AI. The human actually solves your problem. I'm getting the benefits, right? What are the risks? Is my personal problem being shared with some cloud AI, being used to train something? I don't know, right? So we're going to have to balance all these sorts of things. And yeah, it's a brave new world. We're navigating it together. And that's what's happening there. The one final point here, and I stole this from another webinar, and it was a cybersecurity one, and I can't remember who the speaker was, but I think it's a great point. And the speaker used the metaphor of the motor vehicle. And, think back to Henry Ford making the Model T, right? You can have it any color you want as long as it's the color I'm making it in. Back to our kind of limited options for motor vehicles. And I mean, when the motor vehicle first came out, I remember seeing crazy pictures in kids' books of the car could go at like 30 kilometers an hour down a country road. You had to have a person in front of it with a flag, a person behind it with a flag, right? It was seriously regulated. Now think about the modern city, right? I mean, up till now, and I mean, certain modern capitals. I was in Paris recently, and the mayor there's had a huge pedestrianization drive, closing all sorts of roads and stuff. But apart from that, most cities get more traffic over time. They don't get less, right? And think about your organization. Do you think you're going to have more AI in it in the years to come, or less, right? Like, what's going to happen? And in the same way that we've needed more and more rules of the road over time, we've gone beyond just having to have the person with the flag standing in front of the car. We've had to have traffic lights, stoplights. We've had to have, traffic police. We had to have whole, surveillance systems with cameras and number plate recognition. We're going to need more and more regulation of these things over time. And yeah, we were living in an unstable world order at the moment. Things like some people predict the collapse of globalization. Certain technologies like the chip manufacturing that AI relies on are very dependent on globalization and things like that. There's a whole stack of companies get involved in making that microchip that goes into the server farm that powers your AI. And if any of those dominoes fall over, it might take us years or decades to kind of rebuild that capacity. But even then, that means AI is going to become more and more expensive. It's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to become a rarer resource, and you're still going to have to regulate how you use it and stuff like that. So there's no going back. The cat's out of the bag, and that's the story there. Go for it, Karabo.
Yes, so David, we have a question here, and the question is asking then how do businesses protect themselves against these third-party risks with their
Mm.
AI tools? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's something we're going to explore a lot today. So yeah, I mean the headline. I always like to give a headline to answer a question. Now, you want to protect yourself from the risks of third-party tools. Don't use them, right? That's one option. It's not one I'd recommend. So you ignore the whole AI race. You don't use it. There's compromises there. You can build your own AI stack, right? You could buy a lot of your own compute. You can become an expert in using open source models. Make sure the data never leaves your own hardware. You reduce some of the risks. You reduce the privacy confidentiality risks because you're not sharing your data with any third parties. You're training it on your own silicon essentially. But yeah, then you've got to foot the bill for that. And typically you need some very powerful hardware to run anything close to the kind of frontier models. And that also, it doesn't solve the problem of hallucinations, of the AIs giving you, strange answers. There's a very cool podcast that they were actively producing it, and it's kind of gone into a lower cadence now, but it's called The Last Invention. And the last invention in that AI is the last invention we'll ever need because it'll invent everything else, or it's the last invention we'll ever need because it'll take us out. We won't be inventing anything anymore, right? So both the greatest thing or the worst thing in the world. And yeah, the tricky thing with that whole situation is yeah, how do you guard against those risks? Well, there's always going to be some risks. So even if you bring it in-house, you're going to need to guard against that. But yeah, I mean, that's me being flippant and stuff like that. Typically, you're going to have to use third-party tools. Look, you could always spring for the more enterprise commercial ones. Typically, they have better legal terms in terms of how they say they train on your data and whether they do or they don't. It also depends how much you believe those claims and things like that. Or you use them in a more abstracted data minimization way. So I'm a big fan of redaction, for example. If you're dealing with the commercial models, data privacy 101, one of your principles is only use as much data as you need. If you're, like I use AI a lot in a legal situation. Let's say you're getting a AI to help you I don't know, do some cyber forensic stuff, working out whether to report a breach or something like that. don't go and put the details of the breach into, a cloud-based AI, but you can talk about things in general terms. You can talk about this sort of system was breached in this sort of way. These are the kinds of personal information that were compromised, and you can get your guidance that way. I mean, in the same way that you might bounce something off an educated colleague without telling them the specifics or breaching your confidentiality. You can talk about things in general terms. So there's a whole broad way of things like that. And yeah, I'm glad folks are thinking about that because that's really how to do it. So how do you guard against third-party risks? Get an acceptable use of AI policy. So take the one we're going to give you today, and then think about the issues that are talked about in it. But not using these AIs is not really realistic. Then let's talk about the problem of unauthorized, untracked AI use. So the reality is, and one of these points is actually Karabo's, but that staff already use chatbots, drafting tools, coding assistants, and AI features integrated into everyday office software. So you actually mentioned this a few months ago, Karabo, that whether you're going out there and seeking AI is coming to you. And I mean, I stopped being a Windows user years ago, but my understanding of Windows these days is they're basically stuffing AI down your throat every moment of every day. Even the tools we've used for years and years that never had AI features, suddenly those are coming to them. And then,
Yeah.
we're seeing massive uptake of things like Claude. Claude Cowork now is taking, what was the advances and things given to coding, through Claude coding agents and things like that. And they're bringing it to the regular office environment. Like for example, in our industry, Claude Cowork has a compliance toolkit or skill effectively that's specifically designed to help it take on lawyers' functions and things like that. Your mileage might vary with something like that. You've got to remember that these tools are trained on.
Mm.
It's funny, I operate quite internationally. I work with some Hungarian colleagues and things like that, and you do see when it's trained on a smaller data set, the results aren't quite as good. So like often in the legal space, often giving you quite US centric drafting because that's obviously the biggest data set that it's looking at. But that's just a point on that. But then, everything from chatbots to drafting tools, you know how it goes. Most people in the world have downloaded ChatGPT or Claude onto their phones, and maybe they're using the free account and they start off using it sort of as a glorified Google, and they find it is giving them better results. And then they think, hey, I got an email from my gym that I signed up for 6 months ago and I forgot to cancel. I really, how do I type this email? AI, here's the email, drop me a reply. Oh, that worked pretty well. I sent it to my gym. I canceled my gym membership. Gosh, now I'm at work and I've got this pile of emails. Oof, pretty tempting to just copy text out of this and stick it in, AI and get a good response, right? And people are going to do that kind of whether you stop them or not. Not everyone, but some people will. And I always say it's like, kind of any other vice. I always give the example of, kids and alcohol. Not that I'm advocating underage drinking of any kind, but you kind of see the European approach to alcohol often where, Italian parents, for example, might give the kids a glass of wine at the dinner table and kind of teach them that it's nothing special, and they end up using it kind of in a regulated space. And then they don't go into you don't drive the activity underground, right? And that's kind of where I see AI working in businesses where we don't want, our staff to have to hide their AI use, right? There's all sorts of things that happen there. We'll talk about the concept of shadow AI and why it's bad for businesses in many ways, and not just in terms of what's going on that you don't know about on the bad side, but also good things that are being hidden from you if you drive it underground. It's going to boost productivity, but at what cost, right? If people are using these untracked AI things, there's privacy concerns, there's confidentiality concerns, there's just lack of control concerns. You don't know what's happening if you're not monitoring these things, and the organization often becomes unaware. There's various ways you can do this, and we've been having conversations with some of our clients the extent to which they can monitor AI use, and it's kind of a separate topic from today. But most countries, you have some sort of workplace monitoring law. It overlaps with privacy law. In South Africa, for example, we have RICA. Generally, you need to have certain clauses in your contracts and certain oversight things to be able to do that. It's going to become more and more commonplace that employers are going to want to see what's happening on their equipment or their infrastructure in terms of AI things. One simple solution is, and we saw this with, we talk about shadow AI, just shadow IT generally. The one that was always most common was like file sharing, right? There was a time when employees wanted to be able to share files easily. corporates weren't keeping up. People just signed up for their own Dropbox accounts, Google Drives, and suddenly your company stuff was ending up there. Most corporates then kind of used their tech stacks. They used Microsoft SharePoint, various other tools, and they rolled out file sharing. And most corporates, it's largely a solved problem now. And it's the lesson: if you give people the tools they need to do their job and they have it, ready for them, it's kind of like the whole thing of like internet piracy of music and movies. That to a certain extent that's been solved by Spotify and Netflix, where if you make it available and you make it easier than doing it the illegal way, or the way you don't want people to do it, people will go that way as well. So yeah, give people AI tools that you understand and know about, or risk them going and kind of finding their own there. And yeah, what is shadow AI? Let's talk about that a bit. So the problem of shadow AI is really, and this is just a thing of shadow IT, it's the concept of people want the benefits of AI, automation, algorithms. If you don't give it to them, they're going to go and find it on their own, essentially. One of the first problems is data leaks. There was a story in the I say early, I mean, a few years ago now, but like kind of after, ChatGPT kind of went viral and hit 1 million users in a week, or whatever it was. There were some Samsung engineers, for example, who were using it to debug code, and they threw some Samsung code into it, and there was anecdotal evidence of it popping out elsewhere in people's prompts. And I always have this phrase that you stare into the abyss stares back, right? That's what happens with AI. When you're talking to these cloud frontier models, essentially on one level, it's kind of this grand experiment in particularly, I always say, if a software as a service is free, you're definitely the product. And just because you're paying for it doesn't mean you're not the product. You're just less of the product than the free people, right? So we're all helping train these AIs to a certain extent. And I encourage you, if you're using the consumer grade stuff, to go into your settings, make sure to ask it not to train on your data, and all the precautions you can. Having said that, there are lots of things happening in terms of, I don't know the current state of it, but for example, I think it was Shutterstock had a case against OpenAI, and I mean, I think they have a Claude as well, but essentially where they have a court order against them for using all the data they use to train the models. And part of that court order is they're being compelled to keep evidence of all the prompts and stuff. So even, when they say they'll delete it and they won't use it, there are legal reasons requiring them to keep this stuff. So, it's just because you say don't use it doesn't mean they're not using it. They might have to use it in terms of the law. So the problem of throwing these things into these models is it's kind of like the internet, but amplified. Good luck trying to get something off the internet. Good luck trying to get something out of these models. And also the gift of them. I mean, this is the current challenge of the LLM revolution that's happened. I mean, lots of data scientists are quite critical of them, how they work, but essentially, ever since Google published the GPT paper, the General Pre-trained Transformer, it's basically this idea that if we scaled up these kind of predictive algorithms, they would get smarter. And that's kind of what's happening. I mean, I say smarter, just producing we can argue about intelligence, but they're producing better and better results. We don't actually know exactly how they work. That's kind of the magic of them. It's sort of this black box thing. We put things in, we've scaled up the compute and the inference, and we're training them on larger and larger data sets, and they're producing better and better results. Will this peak at some point? Who knows? But part of this kind of weird covenant with them is that stuff goes in, the right stuff comes out. Once it's in the soup, we don't know exactly what's happening to it. And that's a risk you take when engaging with these models. I mean, that's where data leaks and stuff like that can come from. IP risk. So, it's not just, confidential information. Private information. It's also confidential information, stuff that you maybe don't want your competitors knowing. And there's also tensions here where we see it on our commercial website and I think they talked about the great disconnect where suddenly a lot of normal web content that was being served by the search engines and things like that is now being mediated by AIs and not getting as much traffic. And a reaction there that a lot of brands are having is to kind of pull their stuff back, put it behind paywalls. But there's a tension there where you've got a lot of free mileage by putting your stuff out there, and now you're pulling it back, and that's kind of creating problems. But that's how you protect your IP, right? So we're still kind of negotiating this whole landscape there. But how much you give to AIs, how much you keep back is also an interesting question. Then, the whole thing of unregulated automation. I mean, it's interesting. This is the fifth or sixth time I've done this webinar over the last 2-3 years. And it's funny how just new examples keep coming along. And I mean, unregulated automation, it was something that was happening, but it's happening in a big way now. And I mean, I feel like the elephant in the room is OpenClaw, which for those of you who don't know, was essentially this open source project created by this kind of crazy or visionary Austrian programmer dude who was basically sitting on a beach in Thailand doing questionable things with his money, but in his free time, kind of, coding this app basically with Claude Code. And basically, what he did is he took it's essentially like a harness for AIs, or like a hub, and it takes kind of the most intelligent models out there, which are arguably the Claude models, and OpenAI is a contender as well. But it lets you harness these models to a whole bunch of other services. So the best way I've heard it explained is, we've all seen the Iron Man movies with Robert Downey Jr., and he has the Java suit that he can talk to, and it just does stuff. That was the science fiction promise we got from AI. And instead, we got this weird text on a screen that could, like, in an intermediate way, give us some answers and stuff, but it still required a lot of effort from us. He was like, well, that sucks. Let me make a thing that can actually do this. And he essentially created this loop where the system is prompting the AIs for you, collecting the results. And there's a whole system of markdown files that essentially tell the AI what its job is. And you can kind of dynamically talk to it. And I've experimented with it, but I'm not using it for anything kind of production level yet, because it's pretty emergent still. But you can chat to it on Telegram. You can send it out there to do research for you, all sorts of things. But it can potentially do weird stuff, right? It can delete whole file databases. There was a story of someone getting it to organize their photos, and they were sending it to all sorts of strange people who shouldn't have been sent these things. So unregulated automation, these tools exist now, and people are rolling them out. There's a whole spate of people buying Mac Minis to run these things on, or spinning up cloud servers and stuff like that. And I mean, there's some really interesting stuff going on. There's these social networks now where the Claude bots chat to each other and talk about things. Look, it's really just, it's pageantry in my view of these things happening. But that's kind of the latest fad in unregulated automation, right? And off the back of that, we see things like Claude has now rolled out, I forget what their one was called, but Perplexity, for example, the Perplexity computer. So more and more of the kind of consumer-grade AI tools are offering automated or semi-automated solutions to doing these things, because they're seeing people don't want to sit talking to their chatbots all day, so they just want the AIs to go off and do things for them. Now, if you're in an unregulated workspace, it's not hard to imagine your employees getting a hold of a system like this, rigging it up to their email, trying to get it to do their jobs for them and stuff like that. And yeah, something like that, if you do it in the right way, replacing an employee with a $600 Mac Mini is quite a compelling offer, but at what cost? But the critical thing here is you don't want unregulated automation. You don't want automation happening that you don't understand. And that's becoming easier and easier as time goes on. These technologies become more ubiquitous. So that's the story of OpenClaw, what's happening there. But then the other side here is we talked about the bad stuff. And as more and more businesses go along, you can debate the veracity of this claim, but this is the whole thing of, like, it's not the accountant, it's not AI that's going to take the accountant's job. It's the accountant who knows how to use AI that's going to take the accountant's job. I mean, depending on who you believe. Look, I think eventually AI is going to take everyone's jobs, and we can debate whether that's good or bad and how that works. But all bets are off if that's the case. But there's, I think, quite a long time to go before that happens. So, but in the meantime, if you're looking at your competitors and stuff like that, if people are using AI within your organization and it's not something that's above board, that's talked about, that's discussed, that's sanctioned, people are still going to use it, but they're going to use it less effectively because they're not given the resources that they need to use it. And that talent, that expertise is not going to filter out to the rest of your organization. Wouldn't it be better to have a whole team of personnel who understand how to use these technologies, led by those in your organization who do, than it kind of going underground? So that's the other side of shadow IT, is bring it out of the shadows, bring it into the light where everyone can learn from it, and we can kind of innovate together. Is something we want to do. Then, yeah, when staff leave, that knowledge disappears if it's not brought up to the open, if it's not something people talk about, and we certainly don't want that to happen. So let's get into the meat of what an actual AI acceptable use policy covers and what we're giving you today. So what is it? It's a basic plan for AI use. So a set of rules for using AI lawfully, fairly, and transparently. We've used various metaphors, and my latest one is a set of traffic lights. And Karabo, if you wouldn't mind sharing that article at some point that I wrote in anticipation of today on our website, talking about how really what an AI acceptable use policy is. It's not saying we're not going to use AI. It's not saying we're not going to drive on the roads. It's saying to drive on the roads, we need some safety measures to do so, right? We need some traffic lights. We need some controls about doing that. And that's what it's about. It's about setting up those controls. We're going to send it to you in the mail shot after this webinar for you to download. Spoiler alert, if you're tired of my voice and seeing Karabo and my faces, you are welcome to go to our website and search for free AI AUP, and you'll find it's already there for you to download. But I encourage you to stick around. We're having fun, and you might learn something the rest of the webinar. But that's already out there if you want to go and grab it now. And yeah, what is it? It's a flavor of an acceptable use policy. As I said, these things have existed in various forms for a long, long time, but it's designed to be faster. And what I mean by that is it's lean. It's a short policy. You'll see it's 3 pages, 3 or 4, depending on, I forget the current version's length, and it depends how big you make the font, I guess. But it's designed to be adapted quickly, right? Because the goalposts are moving. Most policies, we try and keep them like technology agnostic. It's harder and harder when the goalposts change all the time, and that's certainly the case there. Go for Karaba, so you unmute.
Yeah, I wanted to say also, it also upholds this AI governance principle of accountability, right? Because, because AI governance is so new, you hear words like, oh, accountability, transparency, and explainability, and you ask yourself, okay, what is that, and how do I like uphold it? How do I show it? And having an AUP for AI actually shows it has this accountability aspect. So it tells your employees what they're able to do with AI, how they're able to use it, sets the boundaries, and it makes people accountable for the decisions that they make using AI systems. And that's a way to also show a regulator. If a regulator comes knocking at your door and they say, okay, hey, listen, how are you upholding these AI governance principles? You say, hey, I have an AUP for AI, and this holds my employees accountable, for any decisions that they make with AI. And then you have that like kind of like as a check. So that's another
Mm.
aspect of it too.
No, it's a great point, Karaba. So you often, like from a governance accountability perspective, you've got various people are going to be asking you questions, various points. So particularly it's kind of a procurement, decision. So you're working with someone, and people want to know how you use AI, if you use AI, and they'll be like, "Look, I like your product, I like your price. Is your use of AI legal? How are you doing that? What can you show me?" Right? I'm a big believer of fake it till you make it. Even if you're not doing this stuff, get the policy, talk about it. Eventually, you're like, "Oh, we have a policy now. We better start acting in terms of it." It's a great way to kind of lead things. And talking about our regulators, it's a hard ask for them. I mean, I know initially our South African information regulator was being tasked with AI, and they were quite reticent to it. And I think they've had to accept that that's their lot in life, that it's connected to these things. I mean, it's an interesting debate, the relationship between privacy and AI governance. I'm a member of the IAPP, which is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. And increasingly, their website reads more like an AI governance website. It's moving more into that space. They're seeing that pressure. For a long time, they've had privacy certifications. They've now brought an AI governance certification as their latest one. So kind of there is an overlap between these things. And I kind of see it like a tech stack, in terms of the like data governance space. We start off with cybersecurity laws, those kind of evolved into data privacy. Now they're evolving into AI. I mean, yes, they overlap with other places, but go for it,
Yeah,
Robert.
yeah. And I wanted to say, in terms of like, who would be the regulator of AI, it's very interesting because we have our South African AI policy that is going to be published very soon for comment. This is the final one. And it looks like, we're going to have multiple regulators. So definitely the information regulator, David, you're right, will kind of play this really big role because of this like relationship between personal data and AI. But they're also looking at industry regulators or authorities to oversee AI use. So you'd have the Competition Commission, ICASA, so different kind of authorities in those sectors who would be overseeing that. So that's actually so interesting, and we can't wait to see what the policy actually holds.
That's a great point from a South African context that, everyone wants a piece of the pie. And we see similar things happening in Europe. So I know from the UK, for example, effectively their financial sector authorities were fighting over who gets to kind of regulate different aspects of AI. They didn't just want it to be the privacy folks. That's because
Mm.
they've also got some skin in the game. And yeah, it's in most countries, it's going to be kind of a multipolar world from a regulatory perspective of different kind of authorities you're going to have to answer to. And yeah, I always say, I love the phrase from George Orwell, all pigs are equal, some are more equal than others. Well, when it comes to policies and governance, all are equal, but some are more equal than others. So my argument is why not pick the policies that most people are going to be looking at. So, sure, you need to have data privacy, you need to have data security standards, you need user access control, you need kind of all the standard stack of cybersecurity, data privacy policies. But more and more people are going to want to know what you're doing with AI, and get one of those in place. It'll give you good mileage. So let's talk about who this policy is for and what it covers. So it's going to cover all AIs in your organization. What is AI use? I had really interesting debates with my Hungarian colleagues about, and they actually gave us some feedback on this policy. So it's had some European hands on it, which I was very grateful for. But it's the whole question of in many ways, it's called like the EU AI Act, for example. If you read the introduction, it's really an algorithmic automation law, right? This whole concept of AI, um, there's a long history as to where this name came from, but it's really a coming together of a whole bunch of related technologies. It's not one kind of clear thing coalescing around that. And so therefore the policy is quite broad. There's all sorts of things that kind of amount to being AIs. I mean, we see that in the EU AI Act's definition of what it covers. It's everything from like kind of very basic chatbots, email classification systems, all the way up to like highly regulated, almost banned under exceptional circumstances like emotional recognition, facial recognition, kind of systems that make decisions relating to people's rights and freedoms. Like there's a whole width and breadth of things that count as AI. So the policy covers all those things. We're trying to protect company and client data. So yeah, it's we're trying to prevent harm, we're trying to prevent loss, we're trying to prevent things ending up in the wrong hands, and not just yours, but that relating to your customers as well. And yeah, they recommended guardrails for safe use. We're not trying to ban these things. Yeah, I'm always reminded of I used to do a lot of work in the electronic signature space. And there were so many kind of commercial grade contracts in South Africa that had a blanket exclusion on like signing things electronically. And you just can't do that in the modern world anymore. We can't act like these technologies don't exist. People are going to use them, right? You can't go back in time. People are going to be using these AIs. We just need to do it safely. And then, what scope is covered in terms of the policy? We're talking about who's covered. So it's employees, it's contractors, it's anyone who is using AI on behalf of your organization. What counts as an AI tool? The definition is very broad. It's evolving all the time. Also, kind of how we try and draft these policies, and this is always the balance of making them adaptable. I try and kind of come up with like a generic definition and then give examples. So the idea is that, typically we don't update our policies. It's the last thing on our minds. You get them in place there. The worst case scenario, it goes and dies on an H drive somewhere, which you don't want that. Which is why we keep them short. We want them to be living. But it means that you need to have flexible definition that can grow over time. And I like the idea of adding examples as they kind of come in. And then, which related policies still apply? I always say, it takes a village to raise a child, right? It takes a whole ecosystem of policies to make sure you comply with these laws. This thing can't exist on its own. It's got to reference all those other documents. So at the end of that one, just check there. Yes, it was. Okay, cool. So let's talk about what goes into an AI acceptable use policy. And they're really just rules for responsible AI use. So let's go through a few of those. We're trying to safeguard a few principles. We want you to use AI correctly. What is the correct use of AI? We're all still working that out. It's up to you to decide that for your organization. There's some useful guidance, and the post I just wrote, there's a link in it to the UK government actually released a playbook for how they want their government departments to use AI. And I think it's very good. It gives a lot of good recommendations. One of their key things is you want human review at critical points, right? And it's deciding where that happens. So it's drawing the line between what you're going to use AI for and what you're going to use humans for. And I mean, that's really an evolution of an existing concept that's existed in our law for a long time. If you look at any data protection law, they've usually got some sort of automation rules saying we don't want automated systems making decisions about people's rights and freedoms unless there's a documented process in place, unless there's an opportunity to get a human to review that decision. So it's kind of a continuation of that. Go for it, Karabo.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now when you're talking about human oversight about I think there was a matter that happened last year with Anthropic. They had this really large scale cybersecurity orchestrated attack, and it was actually undertaken by an AI agent. So it was a human using an AI agent to try and like attack various large institutions at the same time. So it was orchestrated. And when I was reading about that, what I thought to myself, oh wow, this a threat actor is so smart, because what they did is that they let the AI agent go out, and figure out a few things, but at critical points, the AI agent would come back and the human would review and say, okay, yes, yes, go through that, attack that aspect. No, let's deviate from that. And it was so successful. And I thought to myself, oh,
Mhm.
this is such a great learning point, just to show you how much human oversight can actually help with the direction of your AI use, and like, for a successful outcome. I mean, in this case, we had a threat actor kind of infiltrate these large organizations, using an AI agent. But that also means in your organization, for better things, you can use human oversight to direct AI use so you can have favorable outcomes. So yeah.
Mm. It's a great point, Karaba. And yeah, it goes back to my point of you can use these tools for good or bad. And yeah, it sounds like it was used very, very effectively for bad in that situation.
Yeah.
So don't do what they did, but learn from their methods. And yeah, that's, at the moment, it's that one-two punch of, humans working with AI that can be, greater than the sum of its parts. And yeah, it's what does AI do well? What do humans do well? What do they each do badly? And can they complement each other is something to use there. So yeah, using it correctly could also be interpreted as using it effectively, using it optimally. And that's kind of what a policy like this can help you do as well. Respecting people's rights. So most countries have some entrenched right to privacy. Even if you go to like Southeast Asia and stuff like that, countries that don't have right to privacy in their constitution necessarily, they have it for like business operational reasons as well, and sometimes instead. But yeah, people have rights. People have, we want to treat people as ends, not just means. And part of that is making sure that when we use these AIs, we give effect to these rights and things like that. Keeping personal data secret. We talked about this a lot. Putting things. There's an argument to be made that if you just put any kind of confidential information into a cloud-based frontier model like ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, you're sharing with a third party. And if you don't have permission to do that, and that's a breach of most data privacy laws, depending on the information you're processing and things like that. Most people don't realize that. They think it's just like using Microsoft Word on their computer or something. It's fundamentally different. It's leaving your computer. It's going to a system you don't control. And just making people aware of that can be a step. But yeah, we still want people to use these tools. So it's about navigating how to do that effectively. Checking AI outputs. In our profession, the legal profession, there's many an example now of attorneys being disciplined, sometimes quite severely, for submitting heads of argument with fake cases, fake citations in them. Check your work, right? I'm descended from a long line of junior and high school teachers on the female side of my family, and I have lots of conversations there around kids using AI to do their work, right? And I kind of have I think back to my high school math stuff where I had, we had calculators, right? Obviously, a very basic technology, but you can't make kids not use calculators. But it was always the thing of, okay, use the calculator, but I want to see how you've thought it out and you've used the calculator, right? So it's my whole thing of like, I don't mind you using AI. In fact, we see this in law firms as well. We want to hire people. I want you to, I'll give you a legal problem to solve. We've had a contract, there's a dispute, who's liable. I want you to use AI to give me the answer, but then I want you to write an analysis of how you got AI to give me the answer. What prompts did you give? How did you go and fact check all the things that the AI made, right? It's a fundamentally different way of thinking about these things. And how you check your AI outputs is as important as how you create them. And that's the way of thinking about that, I think. And then you're striving towards transparency. It was an early case, it's actually done under data privacy law in Hungary, where Budapest Bank was using AI to do kind of customer sentiment monitoring. They had a call center and people were calling in to complain. And as call centers do, they were recording calls, but they weren't being transparent around the fact that these calls were being sent to an AI for sentiment analysis. And it was kind of classifying people as these people are very upset, these people aren't so upset. And they were prioritizing the upset people to kind of call back. And they got fined by the relevant supervisory authority under data protection law, because the EU Act wasn't in effect in any way at that point. But yeah, it's the whole concept of people want to know when AI is being used on their stuff. There's an interesting gray area of like when there's a combination of AI and humans, how much do you kind of have to disclose there? But more and more people are going to resent stuff being given to AIs without their consent or permission or notification. And ethics, how do we apply this in the world of AI? It's common sense stuff. We want to be fair. We want to be kind. That's when people get upset. I always say it's not bad doctors that get sued. It's nasty doctors. So you want to have a kind of a good bedside manner in terms of how you're using these things. Common sense stuff, don't make hateful content. Just because it's a tool that can do things doesn't mean we should use it for nefarious ends. It's all standard stuff. Avoid harmful biased outputs. This is a tricky one. And this is kind of a perennial problem of AI and automated tools. In the US, for example, they have a system that does parole for imprisoned folks and decides, when they get parole and stuff like that. And it's based on inherently racist data that's built up over the years. And it just profiles people based on race, basically, and gives people of certain racial groups shorter parole sentences and others longer, right? it's propagating those biases and stuff like that. And that's the risk you run with taking essentially what are um, really optimized, amplified pattern recognition systems and letting them loose on your business data. Be honest about your AI use. Don't try and hide it. It's an interesting debate, and I've kind of heard both sides of the coin. Some people like client just wants a hole in the wall. They don't care about the drill, right? We don't need to talk about how we use AI. It's just going to turn people off our products. And other people are of the view that like clients don't want to pay for the bespoke human solution anymore. They want to know that they're getting the cost savings of AI. You need to telegraph that, right? And it's going to depend on your industry as to how much you do that. But yeah, there's also a legal compliance component here about being honest about your AI use and not getting caught for using it without permission and stuff like that. And then, anonymizing personal data. So this is operationalizing the data minimization principle in terms of regular data protection law. Don't put confidential data into particularly frontier cloud-based models. Sometimes easier said than done. I'm a big fan of redaction. So it's easier than it has ever been before. And if anyone wants to try their hand at vibe coding, I can recommend downloading Claude Code, getting yourself a pro account, or ChatGPT Codex is also very good. They maybe have higher usage limits. And try and code yourself a little Python script that can redact a text file for you, right? You can have a list of confidential data you want to search for. It could be people's names. You can do the AI can help you do heuristic stuff where it does things based on patterns and trends. Again, in the course of coding this, you don't want to reveal any confidential stuff. So don't give it actual phone numbers, but you can give it examples on phone numbers. For example, if phone numbers are something you have in your notes and things like that. And you can help the AI write you a script that on your own computer redacts things. And then when you go to the AI, you're not saying, for example, I phoned this person on this date, we had this conversation, we talked about this. You're saying I phoned redacted number on redacted date. We talked about redacted thing with redacted person. And if you do it effectively, it's a compromise between just dumping everything into these AIs and doing things on a more redacted basis. Again, you've got to be careful. I have another quote that folks like at Michelson's, which is when does a pile of sand become a beach, right? These AIs are very, very clever, and you give them, or their emerging properties of cleverness, you give them enough information, they can often work out what's going on. So if you're going to redact stuff, you want to make sure you redact it well and, have all the other safeguards in place of making sure you're asking it not to train your data, whether it does that or not. But that's one way, if you're going to do it, how do you say it? You go for it, Karabo?
Yes, we have a question here, and the
Mm-hmm.
question here is, with the ability of AI tools to infer data, so what counts then as personal data when you are redacting or not, like, or anonymizing?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the perennial debate. And I would go to your data protection laws and the definition of personal data. So personal data is any information that can be tied back to an identifiable living human being. And then in South Africa, particularly, it's any existing identifiable or juristic person as well. So our definition is much broader. Most countries don't include that. So let's focus on the human being thing. So yeah, a critical thing is it's got to be identifiable. And we look at the definition there, it's got to be not capable of re-identification, right? And that's the whole when does the pile of sand become a beach? If there's enough information there to work it out, that could be someone. So, yeah, what's your appetite for risk there? I would argue you need to take reasonable steps to make sure you're not giving enough to identify the person. If the confidential information is there, if the name, the email address, the phone number, the company name, arguably is in the prompt you're giving it, then it's clearly identifiable. If it's to the point of, you've taken enough information out. I mean, what I'm reminded about, I had a client back in the day who did a lot of kind of population-based health research, and they talked about they were doing research into HIV and TB and stuff in certain areas, and they needed aggregate data about the population. So they could say that in a certain geographical area, 75% of the people had TB, for example, right? And at that level, it's aggregated, it's de identified, right? But now, if you have a small enough space and there's only four people, and we know three of them are men, then suddenly that data narrows down on more people. So it's contextual as to whether data is de-identified or not. And in the same way, I think a good way to think about it is, imagine you were talking to a peer of yours who works for another organization, not your organization, but you wanted their expertise. What would you tell them? You'd give them general stuff about your problem, enough for them to help you, but not enough to breach your confidentiality obligations, things like that. And if you want to get really clever with it, something I'm experimenting with at the moment is again, you need some quite powerful hardware, but you can use things like Ollama, open source models. I'm a big fan of Qwen, and there's the Gemma family of Google models, things that can run on not very much hardware. You can actually use that to take something confidential and say, summarize it in a generic way. And you still need to check the summary, but it can give you kind of a more generic thing then to go to another model that maybe you don't trust as much from a confidentiality privacy perspective and do that. It does take some technical know-how and stuff to get that working, but it might be worth it in the short term. Then, yeah, complying with data protection laws. Obviously, there's rules there about sharing data with third parties, needing to have DPAs in place and things like that. And again, it's remembering that when you look at these cloud tools, they are essentially, you are sharing with a third party. Look, most of these, they're like the hyperscalers. They will have DPA style terms built into their terms. You typically can't negotiate your own unless you're a massive kind of enterprise customer. But yeah, it behooves you, it's useful for you to understand that stuff. One of the questions we also often get is who owns the IP of the things created by these AI models and things like that. And yeah, I think in the initial phases, a lot of these models were trying to say that they owned the IP, and they quickly found that people didn't like that. So they said that you, as the prompting person, own the IP, but also people can't give more rights than they have. And now there's contentious things about the people who own the IP that the models were trained on as to whether these models can belong to them. And then there's fights the other way. If you look at the EU Omnibus Act, there's a relaxing there of IP and privacy laws where they're trying to give more rights to the AI models to train things. So yeah, it's this constant fight and this balancing act between, again, innovation and risk was kind of the core tension that we outlined for today. And how else can you do it? And talking about how these things work with other policies, I think there's a place for data classification. So you can sort activities into permitted, restricted, and prohibited categories based on data. So for example, there's different ways of classifying data in an organization. The most common ones would be 4 categories. I think it's just simpler to have 2. You kind of have public and private, and that's useful in and of itself if you have no kind of data classification system. And if you would publish it on your website happily, that's public, right? And you probably don't mind people putting public stuff into AIs because they can do that anyway. But if you wouldn't publish it on your website, maybe it's private. And then you need to have some rules for how you interact with AI on those systems as well. So that's another way to make sure what goes in and what goes out of these AI systems. So what's unacceptable use? Impersonation. So we see this happening with deep fakes, and it's becoming easier and easier to. Even there was a whole scandal in Italy, for example, of people using AI voice cloning technology to do social engineering attacks on people, making them think they were relatives. They even hit up some high-profile politicians and managed to convince them to transfer money and stuff like that. Obviously, all that sort of stuff's illegal. We don't want to do that. Offensive content, it doesn't change the fact that the content's offensive, whether you create it with AI or not. I think the risk here is it's so easy to create AI, and the temptation is to be lazy and checking it, that offensive content can slip out there. And maybe if it's not outright offensive, it's maybe low quality content and things like that. We also want to avoid that sort of thing. Discrimination ties back to amplified bias and things like that. We don't want that to happen. Data misuse, so using data for purposes other than which it's supposed to be used for. There's an old case in South Africa of a woman who worked at a hospital as a nurse, and her husband was involved in a car accident, and the counterparty happened to have been treated at the same hospital, and she happened to have access to his medical records and tried to get that admitted in evidence against in her husband's favor to show that the counterparty had a pre-existing brain injury. Classic data misuse. These tools are really going to amplify existing problems. Now you have the ability to to your own ends, take personal information or take company information and analyze it through AIs for your own goals and stuff. That you want to make sure people don't do those things and they understand that all the usual rules stand when it comes to AI. It's just a different way of processing these things. And then, organizational decisions. This ties back to data protection laws. Anything relating to humans' rights and freedoms, anything that we understand a human should make decisions on. We still want that to happen at the end of the day. And unauthorized integrations. This is an interesting one. And it ties in with the OpenClaw thing. And I'm talking as perspective of somebody in this boat. The MacGyvers in your organization, those people who like to tinker, they see all the loose ends floating around and think, if I link this to this thing, I can take a longer lunch break, right? People want to integrate stuff. They want to plug things in. And, there's various schools of thought. Depends if you kind of have low trust organizations, high trust organizations. Typically are more kind of The closer you are to the top of an organization, the less controls are on you. Typically, the more we want you to use things in your discretion, and the lower you are, if you're like client success manager or call center person, you typically have a very locked down workstation. You typically can't do a lot of things. But the more power people have, the more scope there is for them to do unauthorized integrations. You want to bring that stuff, again, shadow AI, bring it into the light, have authorized integrations, have that happening on your terms, because people are going to want to plug things into other things and make that happen. Governance and implementation, just to keep in track of the time, we're almost done, so I'll just go through this one quickly. In terms of how to structure your organization, you want to have your data protection officer, your information officer in charge of it. There's some debate as to who that can be. There's other roles like the AI officer or the AI governance officer. Your leadership needs to do your training and monitor compliance. Staff are going to follow the rules and report misuse, and everyone needs to talk about these things. What does your training look like? Teach the basics, avoid plagiarism, verify outputs, encourage questions, stay informed. And yeah, regular policy reviews, implement AI output checks, encourage reporting misuse, protect whistleblowers, conduct DPIAs for large AI projects. This is kind of a standard thing for any project that has privacy implications. You want to check that out ahead of time, and then have your checks and balances. And yeah, just on the update side, change is inevitable and constant. We need to stay flexy, communicate policy updates, and keep up with AI advances. Things are changing all the time. Cool, folks. So just in closing, use AI wisely, keep people safe, grow your organization responsibly, and follow good rules. And we've given you some in the form of our free Explore AI use policy, and we look forward to getting your feedback on it. And if you want any help extending that or customizing it, that's very much a basic version. We do lots of different comprehensive versions for people. We do training based on it. We help people implement it, and we implement the whole other suite of policies related to that. So yeah, that's it from me. Karabo, any parting thoughts from you?
Oh yeah, I think that this AUP is such a great way to honestly start getting the benefits of AI. Once your employees know how they can use it, they feel safe to use it, they trust that they can use it, then they can really start to explore ways to bring value to the organization. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Karabo. Cool, folks. Thanks for your time and attention. And from Karabo and myself, we look forward to chatting with you again very soon. Cheerio.